There's so many things going on today. Hi, everyone. It works. Maybe this stand does too. Welcome to the last concert of this year's Apollo Music Festival. It always goes so quickly, and so it's kind of a happy, sad day. I'm happy that we got to spend all of this time together playing music and getting to know all of you and reconnecting with all of you that we've known for many years. And also sad because we do so enjoy our time here in Houston with each and every one of you. So our first piece this afternoon is a brief Mozart quartet, Crucial number 160 in E-flat major. It's part of the group of 6 quartets that Mozart wrote in Milan, Italy in early 1773 while he was there working on one of his early operas. The group appears to be meant as a cycle, as Mozart composed them to highlight the circle of fourths. So in order, the keys are D, G, C, F, B flat, and finally E flat, the one we're doing today. Mozart was still quite young, he was only 17, and we can hear that he had absorbed the sounds he had encountered during his travels in Southern Europe. This quartet made its premiere in Milan shortly before Mozart's return to his home in Salzburg. Along with the Italian influence, this E-flat quartet retains the quality of the divertimentos that he had been previously writing, in that it has 3 movements and is a lighter work, rather than the 4-movement quartets that we'll see in his future, and even from later in the year 1773. Mozart had made great strides in his quartet writing since those earlier divertimentos, and by earlier in his life, I meant the winter of 1772 versus the beginning of 1773 when he wrote these pieces. So his truly prodigious musical acumen meant that even in that short time, he was able to give this group of 6 quartets new dimension. In these quartets, he gives the second violin and viola parts much more important lines, especially like passing back little themes in a contrapuntal way. And we are seeing young Mozart working things out. Would he have become one of the world's most famous names based on this quartet alone? No. But we can appreciate his precociousness in this music, his young charm, and definitely see the promise of what is coming. The first movement is a standard allegro. It has a very unassuming, gentle melody that kind of slopes downward, and then it's answered in contrast with a more agile, articulated second phrase. We do hear the maturing Mozart in the slower second movement. It's exceptionally elegant and sophisticated for a person of his age. Music like this makes an even bigger impact on me when we consider the Mozart that we see in his letters that are just full of, crude jokes and his kind of impetuous, impish humor and kind of general silliness. It continues to amaze me that then he could sit down again at the age of 17 and write something so warm, so dignified, so far beyond his years. The opening of the movement is also notable for its harmony. We do not start the piece in the home key of A flat. We start on the root of A flat, so it catches us off guard and takes a moment for us to kind of catch our breath. And then there are little pauses throughout that kind of, I don't know, it definitely shows the kind of mature direction that he's going in. And then the third movement is a presto. It's again an exercise in contrast, like the first movement. Somebody will ask a question, in this case a kind of quiet, stepwise melody, and then the louder volume and wider range of pitches in the melody is the answer. A pretty straightforward, simple little candy to start out today. So our second piece will be living composer Damien Jeter's String Quartet number 1, which bears the little subtitle Neo Soul. And some of you heard this last night with us in La Crosse. Damien is a multifaceted talent. He's a very accomplished bass baritone across operatic stages, including his recent performance in the award-winning production of Porgy and Bess at Metropolitan Opera. He's done many concert performances, most recently with the symphonies of Richmond and North Carolina, and performed in many kind of chamber music and recital settings. A wonderful bass baritone if you want to check him out. Also, a recent note, Damien portrayed the role of abolitionist and historian William Still to great critical acclaim in the Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Paul Moravec's oratorio called Sanctuary Road, which was presented by Virginia Opera. William Still, who is not William Grant Still, the composer, is credited with helping nearly 800 enslaved African Americans escape to freedom. He's also extremely in demand as a composer. Damien has recently had premieres with the Oregon Bach Festival, Kennedy Center, Glimmerglass Opera, Chicago Symphony, and Des Moines Metro Opera. And it's no surprise that he's in such great demand as an operatic composer, considering the breadth of his experience as a singer. An upcoming project of note for Damien is a new major work about Loving versus Virginia, 1967's landmark civil rights case with the US Supreme Court, which ruled that laws banning interracial marriage violate the 14th Amendment. So that's a very compelling subject for which he should, it'll be great, I think. It's co-commissioned by Virginia Opera and Richmond Symphony, and it will make its premiere in 2025 during Virginia Opera's 50th anniversary season. Jeter is also an accomplished actor, which was something I learned about him doing research for this. He's been on NBC's fairy tale show Grimm, and he was also in a Netflix show called Trinkets, and he owns a publishing company and is an author. So as a composer, Damien influences classical music with various styles from the Black diaspora to create music that furthers the cause for social justice. I'll stick with Damien's own words about today's quartet. I'm going to read from his program note for his String Quartet number 1. String Quartet 1 is an ode to neo-soul, the genre of music that became popular in the 1990s, putting a new spin on what we know as the classic soul sound, which originated in the 50s. Soul combines elements of gospel, R&B, and jazz. Its descendant, neo-soul, sought to create a new sound that was inspired by the past, and some popular artists would be Jill Scott or Erykah Badu. The entire premise of String Quartet number 1 revolves around creating a specific vibe. So the title of the first movement, Bop, comes from a saying, that song is a bop, implying that it's a piece with a nice groove, which you definitely hear in this. The rhythmic elements that drive this movement evoke a cool vibe with contrasting sections that are more edgy, as heard in the sometimes bombastic bass line played in the cello. The second movement, called Feelin' Some Type of Way, references a saying that expresses an emotion, confusion, frustration, or disagreement, for example. The main theme of this movement was created to be a bit of a chameleon. The flavor of the melody is heard differently depending on the elements that surround it, so our music underneath. In the beginning, its overall impact is more melancholic, but as the movement progresses, we go through different emotions, happiness, anger, and isolation. The third movement, Please Don't Kill My Vibe, is a play on an original title by a Kendrick Lamar song. The source of inspiration for this movement comes from a theoretical aspect of most neo-soul music, the minor ninth chord. In addition, we hear fragments of the melody from the second movement and an entire reiteration of the melodic material from the first movement, which we also hear in the Ravel String Quartet and the Ravel Trio. So Damien is drawing from our more Western past and bringing those kind of elements forward. The vibe, once again, is cool and laid back, allowing for the consonances and dissonance of the minor ninth to resonate throughout. And one final fun fact about this piece is that our wonderful Apollo violinist, Emily Cole, who is absent this year, but who many of you know well, she played on the premiere of this quartet, as Damien has a very close connection to the city of Portland and their music scene, including with the Oregon Symphony, of which Emily has been a longtime member. So if you look this piece up online, the recording of it and the video is of Emily. So she's still here with us. Our final piece of the festival, we will return to French composer Maurice Ravel and his piano trio, written in 1914. To his friend and pupil, Maurice Delage, he remarked at the outset of the composition, "My trio is finished. I only need the themes for it." This is an interesting and revealing comment because we get a glimpse into his creative process. Ravel, as I mentioned last week, idolized the clarity of structure of Mozart, Beethoven, And both of these men, all of these men, shared an ability to conceive of the entire structure of a work before putting many notes down on paper. And we see him once again choosing a more traditional ensemble, the piano trio, over which to create his impressionistic yet formally classic world. Drawing on such exotic inspirations as Asian culture, French symbolist poetry, Spanish folk music, and impressionist paintings, entirely new sounds emerge in everything that he creates in this kind of rather small canvas. Chamber music only having 3 people, all the way up to his very vast kind of sumptuous orchestral pieces. Ravel's extraordinary string quartet, which we played last week, along with this trio, shows Ravel working out his kind of sensual, dreamy, innovative magic within the classical form. One could almost call it neoclassical, which is something we typically attribute more to his friend, fellow composer Igor Stravinsky. By the end of writing this trio, Ravel was feeling the pressure to finish it, as he wanted to enlist in the military for World War I. It was so urgent that he left 2 unfinished pieces behind, the incredibly famous La Valse and La Tableau de Couperin. For him, volunteering for the service became a single-minded obsession. He felt a great need to serve his country since he had been exempted from regular service when he was 20 because he was in pretty poor health. Most of his friends had already enlisted in the war, but now at age 39, he kind of refused to accept the military's rejections for medical reasons. He had a poor heart and was a very low body weight. And he set off to care for wounded soldiers in a hospital in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which is a coastal town near the French-Spanish border. He tried to join the Air Force in 1915, hoping that his light weight would be an advantage. But he was rejected again. So he finally did manage to obtain a job with a regiment as a truck driver, and he was really proud of that position. We see that in a lot of his letters and correspondence with friends. So just prior to going into the service, in a letter to Stravinsky, he writes, "Do let me have news of you. What is happening to you in the middle of all this?" Meaning the war. "My brother Edward has joined up as a dispatch rider. I have not been so lucky. They don't want me, but I am pinning my hopes on a new medical examination so that all of those who have been rejected will have to pass, and maybe I will be able to pull some strings to get in. The idea that I should be leaving at once made me get through 5 months of work on my trio in 5 weeks. It is finished." So the first performance of the trio took place in Paris in January of 1915 and went very unnoticed by the public and the press, which I think I mentioned last week. He was feeling particularly cast aside by the people around him in the musical community. Ravel is not believed to have been present at that premiere, since he most certainly would have been referring to that performance in letters to friends. He was so preoccupied with passing that medical examination in order to reattempt getting into the service that he seemed to care about little else. So this trio opens with a movement that's simply marked moderate. It has a placid, kind of modal-based theme that feels more like wandering around in a captivating dream than the typical conversational nature of chamber music. Ravel offers us 2 themes. The first, kind of rhythmic and dark, with a second, more lyrical, oblique one, both fitting very squarely into the harmonic and melodic language of Ravel. The first theme can be traced to an unpublished violin sonata from 1897, and the ending of the first movement is of particular beauty, as the closing kind of stretches on and on, feeling resolved, like from that dreamlike state. He loved to dwell on what he described as the incompatibility of the percussive nature of the piano and the sustained tones of the string instruments. But I think this is part of what makes his music so alluring. The strings need to compete with the piano in this piece a lot, and I believe it's an important and necessary way as we navigate Ravel's many moods, from kind of delicate and distant to clamoring and pretty wild through parts of this. The second movement is a glittery scherzo. It's charged with really brilliant rhythms and colors. that also recall the scherzo parts of the string quartet. Garrett was very wise to pair these pieces during this year's Apollo. The distinctive sonorities are formed by combinations of pizzicato, plucking, octave doublings in the strings, and the very kind of light, kind of glittering writing for the piano that makes Ravel famous. He was, of course, a pianist. He borrows from his own orchestration techniques, using lots of colorful devices in the strings like trills, tremolos, where we move back and forth quickly, harmonics, where you lightly touch the string and it gives you a much higher kind of ethereal sound, and glissandos, so sliding in between notes. All very French orchestral things. So it's truly amazing that the innovative and complex writing for the piano demands kind of utmost virtuosity, but it also blends so well without totally overwhelming the texture of chamber music. Ravel is probably one of the great originators of making something really big, putting it into like a small package, like a string quartet or a piano trio. The second movement, it takes its title from the pantoum, which is, it was like an Eastern poetic form, but the pantoum was especially popular with French and British writers in the 19th century. And Charles Baudelaire is credited with bringing that form to European writers. The form of a pantoum, it can be a poem of any length. It's composed in 4-line stanzas, where the second and fourth line of each stanza serve as the first and third line of the next stanza, and then that just keeps going. And then often the last line of a pantoum is the same as the first line. So here it's applied pretty literally in the musical language by the ingenious Ravel. He takes 3 different themes that alternate and shift positions according to that literary plan. For me, it's not instinctively trackable like aurally through the movement, so if you feel the same way, we could all consult Garrett's score afterwards, because you can't, if you have the visual there, I feel like you can track it there. And you may recall from last week and from earlier today, Ravel is a composer who revered the classical form. So it's interesting that he also used like a very traditional poetic form, and on top of that uses the scherzo trio structure from classical music. So it's kind of 2 very clean classical forms in the same second movement. The third slower movement is a Passacaglia, kind of an old Baroque sounding theme and variations built over a repeated 8-measure theme that we first hear very, very low in the piano, then it climbs into the cello and rises further into the violin. It's a return to the remote. It's very sparse, lamenting music over that extremely controlled and long established form of the Passacaglia. One especially poignant moment leaves the violin and cello alone in this kind of ancient sounding open, hollow harmonies before the cello laments once more and we go directly into the finale without a break. In that finale, it's a much lighter, bright, energized Ravel. The strings are trilling, there are big arcs and swells that feel kind of oceanic, and exciting changes of tempo. He again pays homage to his mother's Spanish Basque heritage with his choice of less common time signatures. Sometimes things feel a little off-kilter, and I definitely hear some direct quotes from his orchestral masterwork, the ballet Daphnis and Chloe, which was written just 2 years earlier, so that music was still probably bouncing around in his head. Considering we also hear some of the string quartet's music in Daphnis, then it even more closely knits together these 2 chamber music pieces by Ravel, the quartet and the trio. In the final movement, Ravel really stretches the limits of the ensemble. I alluded to that earlier. He uses all of his gifts to evoke the grandeur of an orchestra with just his 3 instruments at hand here. His acute awareness of the expressive potential of each instrument gives this very clear, like high definition to instrumentation, which is incredibly original. He took a very keen interest in instrumental technique, but he was much more interested in, could I make something that is barely possible for them to play, versus what the instrument was actually comfortable doing in terms of design and what's natural. Some of his friends complained about the music being too difficult. One of his friends said, "It's too complicated. It must be great fun for you writing such difficult stuff, but no one's going to play it except virtuosos." And Ravel snapped back, "Good, then I shouldn't be assassinated by amateurs." So other letters show that Ravel found that performers did not read his instructions in his scores carefully enough. He writes, "Everything to do with technique interests me, and I want to know the violin's most extreme capabilities as well as the cello's." So these technical feats aside, Ravel preferred to describe his music as complex, but not complicated. Again, referencing his love for the simplicity of form, which his French Impressionist harmonic language could come in over top. However, Ravel may lose a little bit of the precision and conversational texture that we're used to in chamber music, but the result is still very exhilarating and imaginative orchestration for piano trio. We were talking about it last night, how it's like right on the edge of being too much, but I think in the best way. So it's time to go. And thank you so much for being here today and all of our concerts, and we'll see you in a moment for some Mozart.